Years ago, one of my mentors made the distinction between simply preaching and actually ministering to people. He told me people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. When I became a full time youth and family minister, I realized how inadequately prepared I was for dealing with the complex challenges facing youth, parents, and families. I honestly cared, but I was not competent. Today's ministers can become better equipped to meet this challenge through the Master of Arts in Family Life Ministry offered by Faulkner University. This program integrates prevention oriented strategies as well as intervention strategies within a church setting, focusing on counseling skills. All these courses may be completed online from the convenience of your home or workplace and at a time that is convenient to the schedule of the student. There is a 50% discount for the members of the Church of Christ. Now, although this program is not designed to fulfill any requirements toward becoming a licensed counselor, it is designed to thoroughly equip the minister by providing courses including but not limited to the skills required for counseling couples, families in crisis, as well as dealing with family dynamics, human intimacy, sexuality, parent and character education, as well as church assessments. If you're interested in more information, contact faulkner.edu/KGST. That is faulkner.edu/KGST. KGST stands for Curley Graduate School of Theology. You can also contact graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu with any questions or to explore the eligibility requirements for the tuition discount. Graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu. Faulkner University is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. TKM Incorporated in Moss, Tennessee is a construction company that specializes in erosion control, seeding, and soil, hydroseeding, hydromulch, minor excavation, and silt fence. They also provide traffic control and construction signs. Their business is keeping people safe, but their passion, their mission, is they wish that all men could be saved. TKM has adopted the nickname the King's Men because as they serve you, they also serve the King. If they could provide any of their services for you, please contact them at 931-243-3958. That is 931-243-3958. Or you can contact them on the net at tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. That is tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. TKM Incorporated is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Before I was ever involved in a drama troupe, before I had heard anything about using skits to teach, before I was ever involved in any kind of theatrical stuff as part of my youth ministry career, there was a thing called chapel announcements. Chapel announcements were basically you have some special interest group on campus and they have an event and they want it advertised. And if you could do something really creative, then you'd get a lot of action for this event that you were going to do, whether it was a fundraiser race or whether it was making the campus aware of something. It was basically the three-dimensional non-internet version of Facebook. You get to do a few seconds in chapel and then the campus is abuzz about it, equivalent to getting your likes and your shares. And then all of a sudden you have this successful event. Lots of really strange things happened in chapel during chapel announcement time. I'm very proud to say that I was a part of some of those. I remember dressing as the Middle Eastern terrorist, the Jackal, and advertising for Mothers Against Drunk Driving and talking about a different kind of terrorism. I remember advertising for the American Red Cross blood drive and dressing like Mr. T, although with my mohawk and my rings and necklaces, I was Mr. B. And we simply made the announcement about the blood drive for the American Red Cross. It was, I'm Mr. B, and I'm bad. I live alone. I train alone. I eat alone. I'm lonely. You will go to the blood drive. You will go to the blood mobile. You will give your blood. You will drink your Coke. You will eat your cookie. Any questions? And then we had a guy named Jerry Germany planted in the audience who raised his hand, to which he was promptly told by Mr. B, "Shut up, fool. You can't ask questions in chapel." And then there's the unfortunate incident involving the rappelling rope and the Spider-Man costume in chapel. On this particular day, I was not involved in the announcement. I was a victim of the announcement. Will Ed Warren, a gentle spirited gentleman who taught a class called Work of the Preacher. This was a super practical class. On Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays, we talked about practical stuff. It was simply how to do a funeral, how to conduct a wedding, how to plan for different things just around the church building, how to do bulletin boards, how to do a bulletin article. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we had a research portion. So in Work of the Preacher, it was a 5-day-a-week class, and Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were the practical side. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we learned to do some research. I think his brother Tom Eddins taught that class. But Will Ed gets up in chapel and says, "Everybody in my Work of the Preacher class, meet at the swimming pool today and wear your swim trunks." What are you going to do at the swimming pool with a bunch of preaching students? I wasn't sure what we were going to do. When I was a cartoonist there on campus, I did a series of cartoons about a kid who was a prophecy major. Now, there was no such thing as a prophecy major. There wasn't anything as a youth ministry major. There was a missions major and a Bible major when I was on campus there. And you could always tell the Bible majors because of the geek cards. The Greek cards. Everybody that was taking first year Greek had a little ring, just like a little metal key ring, and you would have these cards with your Greek vocabulary written on front in Greek and the English translation on the back. And anytime you saw a guy with a ring on his belt with these little cards, you knew immediately that was a preaching student. Somebody was going to be studying for their Greek vocabulary test. And so you could identify the preaching students by the Greek cards. Well, in this series of cartoons I did, you could identify this kid who was a prophecy major because his major required him to wear a robe and carry a staff. One of the cartoons featured the fact that he didn't live in a dorm. He lived in a cave. He didn't have a cafeteria meal plan. He was fed by ravens. When he went to the ball games, he had to stand on the top bleacher and hold his arms in the air. And when his arms were up in the air, the team would win. If he put his arms down, they were losing. All of part of the woes of being a prophecy major on campus. And the last cartoon featured him getting kicked out of campus. He was dressed like a civilian. He was carrying his suitcase. And somebody asked him what happened. He said, "Well, I've been kicked out of the prophecy program." And they said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I was trying to get a drink of water and the water fountain malfunctioned. And instead of speaking to it, I struck it and they kicked me out of the program." But we weren't prophecy majors. I can imagine what you're going to do with a bunch of Bible majors at the swimming pool. We're going to practice, water walking 101. We're going to practice parting the waters of the pool and going across the bottom on dry land. Well, it turns out when we all got to the pool, it was baptism 101. There were guys in the class, in a class entitled Work of the Preacher, who had never performed a baptism. Now, I'd been a youth minister for almost 2 full years prior to coming to college, and I had dunked dozens of people under the water, both willing and non-willing. And just to clarify some terms, baptism, the word baptize, is a word in the Bible that has been transliterated, been transliterated. You take the Greek word and you simply give it English letters. And so when you say baptize, you're basically speaking Southern Greek or Southern Koine Greek, and it really means to dunk or to immerse. And so I had dunked lots of people in the creek. I had dunked lots of people wrestling in a pool, and I'd actually performed some actual baptisms. And I'd witnessed baptism all my life. I was an accomplished Baptist. Now, not in the sense of Southern or primitive Baptist, but I was a Baptist in the same way that John Wayne's character, J.B. Brooks, was called the shootist in that movie. A shootist, by modern terms, is called a shooter. And John the Baptist was John the Baptizer. He was a person who baptized. You see, John the Baptist was his occupation or his activity, not his religious denomination. And so, in the same way that John was a baptizer, I was also an accomplished baptizer. And so I thought, well, what do I, here I'm standing on the edge of the pool, and Will Ed is saying, I'm going to teach you guys how to baptize. And I've baptized lots of people, like I said, willing and non-willing, because baptizing is just immersing people and dunking people. And then there's a religious significance to it when the person is cooperating and has faith. But it turns out that even a veteran baptizer had some things to learn. Because we begin to talk about, I guess you'd call it baptismal theory. What happens if you get into the baptismal pool, a creek, a river, and you got a person who's extremely taller than you, which is an experience that is not uncommon for me? Or what if there's somebody really, really smaller than you? What about a person who is heavier than you? What about a person who is not ambulatory? What if there's a person who has fear of water? What if there's a person who has a fear of falling backwards? I saw this interesting little thing the other day, and I don't know if it was a physical therapist or a neuroscientist, but he would take kids and have them stand up, and he would grab them under the chin and tilt their head backwards and then lean them backwards. And if they had a startle reflex, like a baby does by throwing their arms forward, he was diagnosing them with anxiety disorders. Because he said at a certain age, when your head tilts up and you start to go back, you get to a developmental stage that instead of your arms flying away from you and out, they immediately instinctively go backwards to catch yourself. And people who have a problem with intense anxiety, their normal responses get hijacked. And instead of doing the appropriate thing in the situation, putting your arm behind you when you start to fall, they sling their arms out in front of them. And then, of course, they fall and they exacerbate the situation and they have an injury. But what if you get somebody, when you start to immerse them, you start to lean them backwards, they have this startle reflex and they freak out on you. So now you've got a person, you're falling backwards, and you've got this startle reflex, you're falling backwards, and now you're going to be submerged into water. What could possibly go wrong in a situation like that? Well, if you get combative with a short preacher in deep water, the last thing you do may be to be baptized. I'll hold you underwater till you calm down. The person arrives at the pearly gates and they say, well, you're kind of an unexpected arrival. We don't really have you on the schedule today. What's the last thing you remember? So the last thing I remember is this little guy said, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And here I am. Well, in my career as a person who's performed baptisms, I've seen some interesting things. I got called in one time. There was this dear little old lady. She attended our church for years, and her husband came with her faithfully, but he was not a Christian. He just attended with his wife, and I don't know if she made him come to church with her or if he just did out of convenience. But he ended up in the hospital, and looked like he wasn't going to make it. He was circling the drain, as they say. And so they called me to the hospital, and they said, this older gentleman is requesting to be baptized. Well, I talked to the nurses and said, based on our religious tradition and what we think the New Testament teaches, baptism is immersion. And she said, this gentleman is so sick that if you dip him underwater, you're likely to kill him. I said, well, he's probably going to die anyway, and I'd rather his soul be prepared for eternity than that. So they took us to a physical therapy room, and they had this crane, for lack of a better term, and they had this like a cot or a sling that we put this little guy in. And so I move him out over the water, press the button, lower him just a little bit into the water. And then, I ask him to make his profession of faith. And when he made his profession of faith, I said, because of your confession and based on your belief, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I mashed a little button, and he was, and I let him get into the water, and then I brought him right back out. Well, this gentleman standing behind me, an old school, older gentleman, yelled, "He didn't go all the way under," and slapped the button that dropped this dude into this tank, just like a ducking booth at the fair. I told Roy Hill, I said, don't ever interfere with me when I'm baptizing somebody again. Turns out that the gentleman survived the baptism, who survived his stay in the hospital, and he lived another 10 or 15 years. I've baptized people in creeks. I've baptized people in cold water. I had an interesting experience where I baptized a preacher's daughter in the hot tub on the roof of the Margaritaville. Somebody said, did that really happen, or is that the name of a country song? But anyway, I've had a lot of stuff, a lot of experience with baptism. The one thing that always struck me as odd was that these gentlemen that I had witnessed baptizing people when I was a child, they would do it with such gusto and with such enthusiasm that it reminded me of a wrestling move that I'd seen on Georgia Championship Wrestling called the Russian leg sweep. Now, if I'm standing facing you and you're standing facing me, and I put my right hand all the way across your chest to your left shoulder, and then I take my right foot and I sweep your right foot out from under you, and then at the same time that I'm sweeping your right foot out from under you, I'm basically clotheslining you with my upper arm. That's what we call the Russian leg sweep. I don't know if they've really called that, or they just called it that to, have a fancy name on Georgia Championship Wrestling. But so many times I'd see these guys get into the pool with these people, and they would calmly take their confession. And then before you know it, you've got this water plume coming out of the water where they've Russian leg swept this person into the pool. It looked like they're doing cannonballs in there. Uh, I remember talking about this on the Ben and Travis podcast, a Helping Healing Humor podcast, and coming away from that with them quoting me, or maybe even misquoting me, is, I don't know where we got the idea that you're not really baptized unless we Russian leg sweep you into the kingdom. As I matured as a minister and realized that, most of the people I baptize are going to be larger than me, I figured out how to circumvent the whole Russian leg sweep thing. And that's just, I have people come into the pool, come into the water wherever we're baptizing them, and I just have them kneel. And now they're kneeling in the water, and they're about shoulder deep in the water. I put my hand on the back of their head. I take their confession and I say the thing that I'm supposed to say, and they just bow their head forward, and then they raise their head up. And it's no splash, no panic. You're not taking people backwards. You're not having them overcome the only fear you're actually born with is the fear of falling backwards, and that startle reflex doesn't come in. And it doesn't matter how big you are, how tall you are, how small you are. It basically covers the whole thing. I can just have you kneel, dip your head forward, and take care of the difficulties. The only time I found that didn't work is a lady wanted to be baptized, and she was confined to a wheelchair. And I stepped over the baptismal pool wall and got in the pool, and they handed this lady to me, and I held her in my arms, and I took her confession, and I just knelt in the water. I just basically did a squat, and when she went all the way under, I stood all the way up. Now, we both got considerably wetter than you normally do in a baptism, but I baptized her just by holding her and dipping with her in the water. But this new technique, this kneeling thing, eliminated the Russian leg sweep and all that other stuff. It just eliminated all the difficulties. Of course, now, we're in the pool at Harding. Of course, now we're in the pool with all these Bible majors, and the situation quickly degrades. We pretty much go over the 2 or 3 things you can do. If you've got a real heavy person, you can put them in a chair and tilt them backwards. And if you've got somebody, who's really, really tall, you can ask them to kneel. Well, once we covered the basic stuff, we started being a little more inventive. People were being suplexed into the water. There was this guy on wrestling called the Ultimate Warrior. And the Ultimate Warrior would pick people up above his head and press them, basically military press them above his head, and then step out from beneath them and just let them fall. And so I remember getting a guy to float on top of the water, and I stepped under him and picked him up, holding the middle of his back and one of his thighs, and pressed him above my head and began to yell, "The crowd wants it, the crowd wants it." And Ultimate Warrior, this guy. I took a guy into the pool off the side of the pool using the move called the Oklahoma Bulldog. Well, it was probably not the most professional moment in our ministry careers, but once we checked all the boxes on can you baptize in this situation, we just began to get out of control as students are wont to do sometimes. Bottom line was I already knew how to baptize. But even though I thought I already knew how to baptize, I had never considered the question of a person who's much older, a person with an impairment, a person with a fear of water, a person with a fear of falling backwards, a person with a fear of submersion, a person with a fear of just being in front of a crowd. And because I hadn't considered baptism from their point of view, I had not anticipated some of the difficulties that you could encounter while being a baptizer. And I've been guilty of it. I already know how to talk to people. I already know how to tell people what to do. I already know what works with. You know how many times but how many times has the person that you're dealing with been dealing with this thing? How many times have they been there and done that? You see, it boils down to a question of understanding the other person, your experience versus their initial experience. All the experience and expertise in the world can become useless without empathy, compassion, patience, pacing, and understanding. You know, I mean, based on your experience, based on your education, based on the things that you've witnessed, you know this will be all right. But for the person who's broken up for the first time, for the person who's just been heartbroken for the first time, or for the person who's just never felt broken before, it's important to recognize that they don't know it'll be all right. And you may need to consider what they are facing and the fact that it is new, scary, uncomfortable, and unknown. We meet people where they are and gradually lead them deeper into the water. We meet people where they are and gradually lead them deeper into the process. You can understand that they are afraid without actually understanding their actual fear. I like immersive experiences. I learn a lot when I go to intensive weekend trainings. I've done that with ropes. I've done that with jujitsu. I've done that in counseling. But even in those situations, if I go into an immersive experience and I don't have the prerequisites and I'm expected to start out too deep, too fast, I'm lost and I don't learn as much and I'm very, very uncomfortable when I get in beyond my depth. You know how many funerals I've done? Yeah, but this is the first time my grandmother died. You know how many marriage crises I've dealt with? Yeah, but this is our first fight. You know how many students I've seen with this problem? Yeah, but this is our only child. You know how much training I've had in trauma? Yeah, but I've never experienced anything like this before. I've never felt like this before. I've never been this out of control before. You see, meeting people where they are and accommodating them, size, age, weight, experience, meeting people where they are and accommodating them seems to be more effective than meeting them and expecting them to be totally immersed into a situation without ever considering that they may have only just now gotten their feet wet. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use 2 large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707, 615-371-8707, or you can go to 3Ws and a dot, worldchristian.org, find the Donate Here button, and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure, is sponsored by us. What? We sponsor ourselves? Is that even legal? Check us out on Amazon. You can have access to the titles of Pedagogue, the youth ministry book by Lonnie Jones; Cognitive Spiritual Development, a Christ-centered approach to spiritual self-esteem; Grappling with Life, Controlling Your Inside Space, a small essay using the principles of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to talk about psychological and emotional self-defense; If I Were a Mouse, a children's book written and illustrated by Lonnie Jones; and then The Selfish Reel, a very short story about a decision. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel to see archived lessons and presentations from across the country, some videos with rope tricks and knots. Don't forget to visit the Facebook page, 550 Guys, to learn about the little rope men that we make and that we invented and that we make. And then be sure to click like, subscribe, and share. This is Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure.